time to try our coats on. This sometimes gets a little overwhelming because you have fairly large pieces, you know, they're a little unwieldy, they're quite large. That's okay, it gives us lots to work with. But yeah, it can be a little overwhelming sometimes, so take it one step at a time, and I'll give you a couple tips to work through it as we go. So I'm going to grab my fabric and Herbert's fabric, and we will try it on for the first time. Okay, so we labeled our pieces last time so we can keep them straight. So I have fronts, back, and sleeves. And the first thing we're going to do before trying it on is we're going to sew our shoulder seams. Those will pretty much stay. Like, those aren't going to need adjusted. That's going to be the first thing we do, and that's really going to be the only thing we don't adjust. So do that first, and then we're going to try it on. So here's my back, and this is my neck hole that I cut. This is one side of the shoulder seam. And then I'm going to take one of my front pieces, and you want to make sure that you line up your neck holes. So this front goes on the back with the neck holes to the center, and I'm going to pin them in a couple places. And yeah, I can already tell this is going to be big. That's okay. It gives us lots of room to work with. It gives us room to have a really bulky coat if we want, or a really slouchy coat if we want. That's totally okay. So I'm going to sew it, and your seam allowance really doesn't matter. I'll go ahead with a 5/8 inch just because that's typical for garments. Stitch at both ends, and then take the other side of your front, do the same thing, lined up with that top shoulder seam edge. We're going to try it on for the first time. Again, it's going to be large, and that's okay. So put those shoulder seams right at the top. It's almost like a poncho right now. That could work. And I'm really just getting a rough estimate for where the sides need to be. When you're doing this, make sure you don't pull it and pull open the center seam. You really want to give yourself lots of room there. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and pin it just so that I don't pull it open accidentally. And then I'm going to check where the side seams are. I have a good 4 inches, but here's the thing. We need to account for our seam allowance, and you need to account for layering in the winter. You know, if you have a big bulky sweater on, you're going to take up more space. So that 4 inches seems like a lot, but it might not be in the end. So think about how you're going to wear your coat. Will you have a bunch of layers on? Will it be more of a cool spring weather jacket, or will it be a heavy coat? How much do you need to account for? So it's safer now to err on the side of caution and not take out too much at this point. Now my sleeves are definitely, this is definitely way too long. So I really want my sleeves up here, but my hips don't need to be all the way in here. So see, the top of my shoulder is right here, and if I pull that all the way down even, Well, I'm overlapping quite a bit. Let's see what happens now. If I pull this, yeah, that's still, it would technically fit maybe snugly, but I want to leave more room than that. So I am going to trim off about 3 inches and then add the sleeve, that top sleeve seam, and see what happens then. Okay, so I trimmed off about 3 inches on each side. Let's see what it looks like now. And again, worst case scenario, save your scraps. If you cut too much, sew your scrap back on. It's a quilt coat. Just sew it back on, it's okay. I literally did that with the frog quilt coat. I'll show you in a second. But I did. I have like this little extra gusset going on because I sewed it, I cut it off too much, but you would never know. Okay, I really like this. This gives me, I've really got like 2 inches over here, so I think I'll have plenty of room. I like this. So my seams are right at the top of my shoulders. Like how fun it is when it meets up. And technically I did not adjust because remember I said I cut them off center. You know what? I'm rolling with it. I don't care. It's still cute. They still will meet up in the middle. And I think it'll work just fine. So yeah, this still fits in every place. So my hips are wider than my shoulders and it still fits down there. This can be adjusted later. And if you want to, you can even cut off extra up here and taper it down. At this point, I'm not worried about doing that because what's going to happen is my sleeve will go on. And then when I sew my seam, I'll just come in past my shoulder seam, my sleeve seam, and come in here and go down. So if that makes sense. So when my sleeve will sew here and go out, and then I'll sew my sleeve and come all the way in, and then I won't turn to pivot down till I get in here where I want it to fit. So this is a good start. I really like this. This is gonna be a fun one. Let me show you the quilt coat that I originally did with that gusset in it. So this is the original quilt coat I did, and I cut it a little too small, but I just added in a gusset. This is not part of the front or the back. It's just a scrap I added on. It's absolutely okay, and I've never had anybody say anything about it. Nobody noticed. This time it doesn't even need it. It was just that much. And it's okay. You can add in if you need to. So, don't panic. Just add extra. Don't go in too much at a time. And you can always bring in more later. So, small steps. So, once you get it trimmed where you want it, and again, be generous with yourself. You can always take it in more later. But once you get it trimmed the way you want it, we're going to add our sleeves on. Now, if you are adding binding to your seams on the inside, you probably want to go ahead and finish these up now. So add your binding onto these shoulder seams before adding your sleeves on, because then we'll intersect the seam and it'll just be easier. So add your binding or finish this seam and then add your sleeves. So the sleeves go on pretty simply because it's just a straight seam. This was intentionally designed to be simple without curves. We can add the curves later if we want to, if we want to take it in a little in the waist, but I wasn't gonna make anyone deal with, curves and crazy shapes. So for your sleeves, it's very simple with just a straight seam, and you're gonna add those onto that top shoulder section. So on your coat, on the front and the back, the seam, the shoulder seam denotes the center, and then you'll mark the center of your sleeve. Use a PIN or a PEN or a disappearing ink or whatever you need to mark, whatever you have to mark the center of your sleeve. And actually I'm going to use this end And if your fabrics are directional, make sure top of the sleeve is up. And then I'm going to pin the center of the sleeve starting at the seam and just sew this straight line. Now, if you want to check fit now before you start finishing your seams, you can. Sew this on, get the fit correct, and then you can always undo just enough at this intersection to finish these seams, sew it back, and then finish this seam. I don't know if y'all can hear my 3D printer. I think you can, but I am completely obsessed, having way too much fun with it. It's pretty much running 24/7 right now because you can print fun things and you can print practical things. And I'm printing practical things for my class next weekend in Florida to give out, like as door prizes and things like that. So it's a lot of fun. Okay, there's one sleeve pinned on. And I'll do the other side as well. Mark the center. And I'm using just the center sashing as my center, so I just use that to mark my center. Okay, and then you're going to sew those two seams. Okay, from here, this is a large sleeve. It's okay, we know that. So from here, you can pin before you sew. So you're going to pin or sew the sleeve, like fold the sleeve in half. So I'm going to pin and I'll put it on real quick to show you. And do this part with right sides together. Do it inside out so that after you pin and you get the fit just right, you can just sew where the pins are. You don't even have to flip or transfer or mark or anything. Just pin it as if you were going to sew it, and then your pins will be in the right place. Now at this underarm seam, you're just going to sew and then pivot at the underarm. So I'm going to pin this seam and then down the side, and I'll do that on both sides. There's one side pinned. This is when it starts making sense. It starts taking shape. This is where you will, make sure you're pinning sleeve to sleeve. I was doing it wrong. You might want to start at that underarm seam and work out in both directions. Okay, then I'm going to try it on. Wrong side's out. And just see what it looks like. It's big. Oh, look at the sleeves. It's okay. What we trim off will just become the hood. But see, actually, short of the sleeves. Might have been a little too generous. Actually, were these the ones that I just kind of like used the extra, whatever was left over, and I was like, yep, good enough. Okay, but short of that, actually the rest of it is not horrible. I am probably gonna sew it here for now. And then I might take in the width of the sleeves a little bit, obviously the length, yeah. But I might take in the width a little bit, but it's slouchy like my, what's the name of that designer? It's slouchy like that one, and I really like that one. So whatever I have extra will become hood and pockets. But I'm actually pretty happy with that fit right there. So you see where my sleeve is actually attached up here? That's okay. If I wanted to, I could do a whole new seam. You know, take it in a couple inches just like we took in the waist, but it doesn't bother me. I really think it's okay like that, and I might just leave it, but I will flip it right side out, take a look that way too, and go with that. So for this week, you just need to sew your shoulder seams, sew your sleeves to the body, and then sew your sleeve and your side seams. That's all you need, and then we can start working with fit. So next week we're going to talk about accessories and finishing and adding pockets and all kinds of things like that. But I think we made great progress. Again, this is not a budget your fabric, be extra careful kind of project. This is a, you know what, let's just make a quilt coat and have fun with it and get it done, and then have a quilt coat to show, and the scraps can be used for something else. It's more like that. So I will see you next week. I'm going to do the same thing with Herbert, and I will probably post that progress on Instagram and Facebook just so you can see what his quilt coat looks like. Bye.